The only way that I know how to make money, um, is to be spectacularly boring. To do a lot of things that your body and your mind desperately want you to do, and don't do a bunch of things that your body and your mind desperately want to do. And I know it's like I know we all have these really, really strong desires to go and do something, um, to, whatever it is, right? Like you want to go to a restaurant or you want to go, um, on a vacation, all these kind of things, buy a nice car. A car is like the killer for everybody. Um, all these things, and you add it up. And over time, it really makes a big difference towards reducing your possibility of ever becoming wealthy, right? And you know, the desires that you feel, all those feelings, those tingly things to impress other people, to want to be liked, to all those things are very, 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 very strong. Now, on top of it, there's a need, right? There is a need to spend on certain things, and it's very difficult. It's not easy, right? Like people talk about, is there a need? Is there a want? Right? Like I think that's a very simplistic. Um, it's a lot more different than that because you're going to see the world and you're going to justify in your head that you need to get something. Because ultimately, there's probably a little inkling that you actually need to get that particular thing. Um, and the only way that I know to get rich quick is to go and imagine that your get rich quick is over the course of 50 years. And 50 years, I got to remind you, is very, very short in any time horizon. Um, it's spectacularly short. Now, the trouble is you have to control all of those impulses that you feel to to withstand it, right? So that's on the that's that's on your side, right? There's also the control that you have to feel. And people talk about self-control. Sometimes they call it self-regulation and fancy talk. But it's really these feelings that you get, these tingly feelings that really, really want you to go do something. And it's like almost like Puritan values, right? Like I view like self-control as much more like Puritan values. The where you decide that you reject all of those bodily impulses that you have, right? And it's very difficult to do. And that the key ways to often build wealth, like to actually have a pretty good income coming in. And now this is also tricky, is to get a good solid education. Right? It seems really boring. But why is it tricky? Is because people choose educations that seem really interesting to them rather than things that are practical. Um, and even still, you might say it's practical, and it still might be not the best choice. You still could potentially do better, right? And that's what makes it really, really challenging for all of us to sort of figure this out and to build wealth for a long time. You have to control impulses for a long time. Um, you will get into predicaments where you do have kids and you have to think about, okay, I need to pay the bills. How am I going to pay the bills? If I have these kids, and sometimes we end up, justifying an extra treat when that happens, when you're paying, you're paying the bills, because it feels like a slog all of the time. And so it's like thinking about, so even if you had kids to pay for, it's like translating all of those impulses that you have for the things that are being sold to you and translating into things that are just free, and inexpensive, right? So it's instead of having, a Big Mac, you go and have a walk. And man, none of that feels good, right? Instead of having, eating out one night, you have potatoes, you boil potatoes and turnips, and you eat potatoes and turnips, or have rice and beans or whatever, right? And boy, it so here's the challenging thing is that actually it does feel good to do those things, right? In my experience, and I think in many, many people's experience, it feels so enlightening and so amazing to go and to have make your own meals, have potatoes and do all those kind of really basic things, have turnips. Like it actually does feel good, and it's wonderful when you do those things. But the impulse and what is sold, the messaging that is often sold to you is far more powerful, right? Like I never feel good after I eat a Big Mac. Actually, I haven't, I know everybody says this, right? It's a big joke, but I haven't gone to McDonald's in a long time. And the reason is it makes me feel super, super, super gross after. It's not that I don't enjoy it. I just feel very queasy. Um, But all of these things, right? Like that's the challenge with often getting rich, is that it's such an impulse control game. And, you know, I often think about that as like, why can't you do that? Right. Like it seems like a easy, obvious thing, right? Just have Puritan values. All you need to do is just this, right? Like I love that. But here's the thing. We're raised differently. Many of us are raised in far different families. I came from a much more Puritan family, uh, that, honored some of those things. So we ate at home a lot, in my view, but it's just my humble, one man's humble opinion. It was far too extreme. So I know my mom listens to this. Um, but that was the way that they raised and lived their life and raised their kids. And that's totally fine. In my humble opinion, it raised a little differently. Um, but that's fine. That's the life that she had, and I grew up in a wonderful, very supportive family. Support in the sense of, this is the thing with family dynamics. I did not necessarily agree with everything that they said and did. Right, like and still even today, I think like, oh, it's not how I would do things. But they were always there. It was unconditional love, right? And that unconditional love is very, very powerful, which means, all of us could have screwed up. And all of us have different views of the world, very, very different views, but we all see ourselves as siblings. We all, relatively get along. It's not, hunky dory sort of imaginary views, but we do okay. But that's besides the point, right? Like the unconditional love in your family's great, but not everybody has that. In fact, I think it's extraordinarily rare. I grew up in a very, very rare household, extraordinarily rare. But then on top of it, you have all of these genetic things that, some people say, so well, it's just your personality. No, it actually could be genetics. And it could be the environment that you're like larger macro environment that you're actually in. Right. Like there's a lot of things that are going on that trigger these things and make it extraordinarily you like if your genetics are programmed for you to have impulses. Right? Like, man, that's hard to live Puritan values then. So my point is with all of this is getting rich quick. It's extraordinarily easy if you just change that quick to 50 years, and 50 years is easy. And that is very normal for somebody to build pretty darn good wealth. Right? Like most people would say, "Oh yeah, that's fantastic." Um, and on top of it, doing that is very hard for all of us because we often don't live in 50-year viewpoints. We live in what's going to happen tomorrow and what's happening today, right? And having that question, and this is the hard thing, is is reconciling that it's both genetics, right, and the environment and all these kind of things. But also there is some of your thought processes, right? Like you can grow up in a crappy family that doesn't have unconditional love and do phenomenal. You could have genetics that make you a lot less, make it difficult to control your impulses, but do phenomenal. And so a lot of it is not only all these things that we have, but it's also thinking about how are we going to control and manage these things, which often, not always, can be learned. So try. All right. Take care and have a wonderful day.